There has been a relatively large development in President Donald Trump's $10 billion lawsuit against the IRS, with a federal judge in the case being so against the lawsuit that she not only dismissed the deal that was negotiated between Trump and the IRS, but then she also went further and slapped Trump's lawyers with penalties. One of those lawyers is not even allowed to enter her courtroom for the next year. Let's go through the details of why she took these steps. But first, let's retrace history and review the details of the case. Now, we reported on the lawsuit itself back when Trump first issued it earlier this year, but let's do a quick recap because I'm sure many people have forgotten about it. During the 2016 presidential campaign, the media made quite a sticking point of the fact that President Trump, well, at that point, candidate Donald Trump would not release his tax returns. And to be fair, that was unusual given the fact that since the 70s, pretty much every major presidential candidate did make a point of releasing their tax returns to the public. Now, Trump, for his part, claimed that his returns were under an IRS audit and that he said he would release them once that audit was complete. But his opponent said that he did not have to wait until that audit was complete. He could release them at any time. He was just choosing not to. This tax return controversy followed President Trump from the campaign trail into his actual presidency, wherein one of the major lines of attack against him, besides the Russia stuff, had to do with the fact that he was hiding something in his taxes. There were thousands of hours of cumulative airtime spent during his first term in office on this particular topic. Now, eventually, during Trump's first term, at the tail end of his first term, his tax returns were leaked to the media by an IRS contractor. That contractor's name was Mr. Charles Littlejohn, and he basically uploaded the files in secret to a private website before then downloading those same files to his personal devices, things like an old school iPod, and then he snuck them out of the IRS building and handed them over to the media. That took place all the way back in the year 2020. But he was eventually caught, indicted, arrested, found guilty, and he was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison. That's where he currently is. He's locked up in an Illinois federal correctional facility, due to be released in October of next year. However, President Trump said that this was not enough. The fact that he was locked up was not enough, and that the IRS had failed to take the mandatory precautions to prevent such a breach in the first place. And as such, you have President Trump, alongside his two sons and the Trump Organization, file a lawsuit against the Treasury Department for $10 billion in damages. Now, if you want a deeper and more granular breakdown of all the specific points in that lawsuit, you can watch our earlier episode from earlier in this year. I'll throw a link to it. You can find it down in the description box below, right below those like and subscribe buttons, both of which I hope you smash so this video can reach ever more people. All right, just to pause here for a super quick moment. Over the next 3 to 5 years, spatial computing is positioned to redefine how we work, moving our daily tasks from physical desks into immersive digital environments. In fact, Apple, Meta, Google, and Qualcomm are investing billions into spatial computing, betting that it's going to become a core part of everyday life. And today's sponsor, Immersed, is at the forefront of this coming shift. This company is basically reshaping how people create, collaborate, and connect through AI and spatial computing. Millions of professionals use their tech, Fortune 500 companies rely on it, and it's become the #1 productivity app on the Meta Quest store. Immersed is positioned to lead this shift, a shift that could prove to be the biggest since the iPhone came along. And alongside their software platform, Immersed has also developed Visor, which is a lightweight headset designed specifically for productivity. So essentially, they have the trifecta: the hardware, the software, and the AI strategy. And already, Fortune 500 teams are using their tech, with users spending upwards of something like 60 hours each week working inside the platform, which gives this company a competitive advantage in a rapidly growing market. Now, of course, we can't predict the future. Nobody can. But every major tech shift creates massive wealth for early investors who recognize the pattern. And to that end, shares are currently available at 79 cents per share through a Regulation A+ offering open to retail investors. More than 8,000 investors have already participated, and if you'd like to learn more about this company, there will be a link down in the description box below with all of their details. Thank you so much to Immerse for sponsoring the episode, and now back to the program. But getting back to the update, eventually, in May of this year, the case was actually settled out of court. President Trump agreed to drop his lawsuit, and in return, the IRS would, for one, create a $1.776 billion anti-weaponization fund to compensate Americans who were alleged victims of government weaponization. And secondly, both the IRS and the DOJ agreed to drop any tax-related investigations and or audits into Trump, his family, and his businesses. Effectively, it would give him protection from audits and or penalties on their past returns. Maybe in the future, he could be audited again, but anything from the past was basically off limits. And so again, this settlement was reached all the way back in May. It was reached on May 19th of this year, and everything seemed to be all well and good. Case was closed. However, within just 2 weeks of that deal being reached, the case was actually reopened by Judge Kathleen Williams, nominated to the bench by Barack Obama. She claimed that several dozen former judges had asked her to probe this deal to see if it was actually proper. Quote, in a May 29th order, Williams said she was probing whether fraud had been perpetrated on the court after 35 former federal judges formally requested the probe. They alleged that the lawsuit was collusive, meaning that Trump and the IRS were working together for a disposition of the case favorable to Trump instead of properly litigating it in the usual adversarial setting of a court. And so this then takes us to last Monday, July 13th. That was when Judge Kathleen Williams threw out not only the settlement, but also the lawsuit in its entirety. She wrote in her court order that since the president controls both the IRS as well as the Justice Department, he can't really sue himself in a personal lawsuit because the two sides in this particular case, they're not really opposing each other like in a normal court case. Instead, she wrote that the whole thing looked a lot more like an elaborate setup designed to get a court stamp of approval, court-ordered stamp of approval on a political deal. Here's specifically what she wrote, quote, the nature of the suit itself and the conduct of the parties and counsel from its filing make plain that this was an attempt to use the court to provide some legitimacy to an agreement to confer immunity to people and entities affiliated with the president and to earmark billions of dollars from American taxpayers to redress grievances not defined in the law. She also wrote that, quote, the plaintiffs in the case have no answer for the fact that the lead plaintiff, President Trump, directs and controls the defendants, which renders the lawsuit non-adversarial, collusive, and jurisdictionally improper. And then, as further evidence of this being what she describes as strictly political tactic, she referenced the fact that the fund that was being established by this deal was in the amount of $1.776 billion, an obvious reference to the year 1776. Quote, even the amount of taxpayer money that would have gone to the fund, $1.776 billion, speaks of a branding effort rather than a deliberate and thoughtful calculation of damages. The plaintiffs acted in bad faith and initiated a lawsuit to provide cover for a collusive settlement for improper purpose of dishonestly advancing a political narrative and to obtain the imprimatur of judicial legitimacy for a settlement that had no viable basis in law or fact. And as such, the negotiated settlement between the IRS and President Trump was revoked. Also, this judge's order, it hit two of Trump's lawyers with punitive measures. You had Mr. Alejandro Brito, one of Trump's personal lawyers, who signed the initial complaint. He was referred to the Florida bar for disciplinary review. And then Mr. Daniel Epstein, another one of Trump's lawyers, he was barred from either practicing or appearing in the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of Florida for 1 full year. Now, once this court order was issued, we here at the Epoch Times reached out to the Justice Department for comment, and one of their officials got back to us with the following statement, quote, there was no collusion in this case, and the partisan judge who speculated otherwise has disregarded decades of precedent. Now, as of today, as of right now, an appeal has not been filed by President Trump or his legal team, but it likely will be in the near future. That's according to the current acting Attorney General, Mr. Todd Blanche, who is currently working on a Senate confirmation, and he said so in an official capacity. Now, I will give you any updates on this case as they become available. For instance, when the appeal gets filed and there's some kind of decision in the appeal, and maybe if the appeal gets appealed again to the U.S. Supreme Court, I'll give you all those details as they become available. However, until then, if you'd like to go through the court records in this case for yourself up until today, I will throw the relevant links down into the description box below if you're the type of person that likes to dig deeper into the weeds. And all I ask in return is that if you haven't already, please do smash those like and subscribe buttons so this video can reach ever more people via the YouTube algorithm. And then lastly, on a totally unrelated topic, if you are interested in what happens to human beings after they die, so totally unrelated, but a very interesting topic that I'm sure all of us have wondered quite a lot about, I would highly recommend that you check out a new documentary film that was put out over on Epoch TV. It's called Final Hours, and it's a great film because in it, we've interviewed a lot of different people from different walks of life who had one thing in common. They either died, meaning they clinically died at some point in their lives, like no heartbeat, no breath, no brain activity, nothing. They were just clinically dead, or they were brain dead, so they were in a coma. But either way, they came back to life, fully remembering everything that they saw on the other side. And what they described was fascinating. Again, these people had no relationship to one another. They were from different walks of life. They'd never talked to each other before. But they all described very similar phenomena, seeing beautiful lights and colors, seeing heavenly realms, heavenly beings, being in communication with them, being able to see their lives from outside the constraints of time, being able to see their own lives through the eyes of other people, the people they've heard, the people they've loved, being able to feel a universal love surrounding them. It's a fascinating documentary. And again, if you feel one person say that, it's like, okay, maybe that was their experience, maybe they made it up. But so many people spoke with such strong conviction. And it's really just the tip of the iceberg because we, of course, were limited in how many people we could interview for the film. But there are thousands or even tens of thousands of very similar stories, which all kind of, they're coalescing in a new scientific study of post-death experiences or near-death experiences, whatever you want to call them. And they are helping to truly answer the question and at least broaden the discussion about what happens to people after they die. It's a great documentary. A lot of people who've watched it left us comments saying it changed the way that they viewed what life actually is. So check it out. If you haven't already, the link to it will be right there at the top of the description box below. Just click on that link. It'll take you to Epoch TV where you can watch it right away.
Technically I was dead, but I felt that this was more real than real, and I felt more alive than life itself.
Thousands have glimpsed something vast and loving waiting on the other side.
I was surrounded by beings. Some of them I recognized from this life.
It's more just like a light, the light of God. I was so happy. I just felt like more and more of the pain of this world was just floating away.
What do these human experiences mean for our collective soul?
The more we can come into harmony, love, and kindness, the more we're aligned with the essence of the universe.
And then until next time, I'm your host, Roman from the Epoch Times. Stay informed, and most importantly, stay free.